Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your board game doctor today. And I am going to go over a game that I've been wanting to play for a while. This is an Uwe Rosenberg game called Clash of Magic Schools. Here's the rule book. So, Clash of Magic Schools is a re-implementation of Babel, that was designed by Rosenberg, I believe, in the year 2000 or around that time. So this game is about 20 years old or so. And so this game is it's a two-player game. It's kind of a tug of war between two opposing factions. It's set in a magical school setting, think Harry Potter. And we play back and forth, taking certain actions, which I'll describe as I play a few turns of this game until someone meets a couple of victory conditions. You either need to have 15 or more trial points in front of you, while your opponent has 9 or fewer. So, yeah, that's basically how the game ends. There's a thing called overtime, but maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. So there are some caveats to how this game can end. You're catching me mid-game as I play these two players single-handedly. I will show you the hand of every player, or both players, as we play along, and I'll describe how this game quickly plays in the few turns that I will have. Just so you know, you do have a player aid that tells you what you can do on your turn, as well as the spells that you can cast. And yeah, so we'll go from there using the aids that we have in front of us and the game that has been partway through played. So right now I am the black player. So at the beginning of the game, we started here at the end of this board, and we have moved ourselves over to certain arenas, these columns that we have. And when you move, you discard a card according to the color of the arena that you're moving to. So you discard a student, and as the white player, I moved over to the yellow wind arena to do so. So that's like the first action that you can do on your turn. But anyway, so at the beginning of your turn, you draw 3 student cards to your hand. I'll make sure you can see what I've got here. So I had 1 card in my hand already, and I have 2 fire and 2 yellow students. So each student will look the same. Either way, the art will be different, but their ability will be the same for every single student. So you don't need to memorize or understand more than what the yellow school or faction, what their spell can do, essentially. We'll go over that in a little bit. So, with these 4 cards, I get to determine what I want to do on my turn. And so the first thing that I could do is move, which I've described. So if I wanted to move to the red arena, I would discard a red card to do so. I don't think I'm going to do that. And by the way, when you take actions, you can take as many actions as you can and want before you pass. So the next thing that I could do is assign a student to a column. Now, if I were to do so, for example, I'm not going to do it this turn because I might. Let's go ahead and assign, since I'm at the Wind Temple, the Wind Arena, this is not Zelda, I'm going to assign this yellow student to that column there. And I just place them right, on top of the column that was previously there. And I think that will be it. Since I don't have a lot of opportunities to do much with this hand, I think I'm going to save it. As far as I know, there aren't any limits on hand size. And afterwards, the last thing that you do before you end your turn completely is you reveal 2 trial cards. So these trial cards essentially just have a point value on top of them. This is how you score points throughout the game. And what you do is you arrange them from the biggest on bottom to smallest on top, and you place them here on the trial column. So the black player has a lot of these trials. What you'll do, hopefully I'll demonstrate what you can do later on with those trials as well, but you do assign them there, and hopefully we'll bring them into your column to add to your score throughout the game. So right now, black player has 3 points. So that is my turn, so I will pass to the white player. So the white player will draw a couple of cards. I've pretty much gotten the same amount of cards here, but let's see what we can do with them. So what I will do, I suppose, is discard a red card to move my token back to the red location. And I think what I'll do next is add these 2 cards to the top here. Now, what I could do now, if you notice and keep track, if you noticed here, my different columns in the white, this farther darkness column, I suppose, has 2 students underneath it, and it has a trial of 2 above it. I always need to have as many students as there is the number of trials, if not greater number of students than the number of trial that is on there. So everything so far is according to, it meets the criterion for having the number of students. So after reviewing the rules, so when I decide to, hopefully soon, pass a trial, which is to take a trial from one of these stacks, and you can choose the topmost card from either stack. So in this case, it's going to be 4 on each side. I could take that as an action, take that card, and place it on top of an existing pile that is 1 number less than this, right? So in this case, I would need a 3 in any one of these stacks to be able to place this 4 on top of that. Now, there is a spell that can mitigate that, and so I don't have that available as of yet. So I'm going to pass my turn for the white player and reveal 4 more. I guess I didn't, or 2 more 4s. I didn't shuffle this as well as I would have hoped. Let's see if we can make anything happen here. So I've got 4 red for the black player. I've got 4 red, a darkness, and a air student visible. So we've talked about moving and assigning students, which is placing them into a column. You can pass a trial, which is taking it from over here and placing it on top of an existing trial. You can summon students as well. So you must move the top 3 students from any column and move them to another column. They don't have to go to a column that already has a number on it or not, but your remaining columns should continue to have that trial met, essentially. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the top 3 cards here and move them over to this column over there. So now I have 3 earth students, green earth students, and 2 water students in this arena right here. To clarify, I wouldn't be able to take a level 4 trial and place it here because I would need a level 3 trial here prior to be able to move the trial over on top of it. So unfortunately, I can't do anything about that right now, but this is a great example to show the last example of what you can do on your turn, which is to cast a spell. So the reason that you want to care about assigning your students in certain ways on columns is to hopefully get 3 in a row, like so. If you have 3 in a row, you can cast the spell of that color. You would have to discard that middle card to the discard pile. So in this example, I would take the middle green person and discard them. And you activate that spell that is indicative of that player type or that student type. So going through the list of what these can do. So, I mean, for example, let's do this. So, I move those over there, and that's fine and great. Let's discard a red card and move the dragon over to this arena here. Now, I'm going to play, let's see, 2 of my fire students here. And since I have more than 3, I will activate that spell and do that. So I'm just going to reset a little bit because I just noticed that I could do this. So yeah, pretend that came from right in the middle. So if I activate the fire spell, which is Combustio in this game, it says to remove all of your opponent's trial cards from this arena. So what this does is I have to discard these, and according to the rulebook, I place the lowest one on top of the deck, like so. And yeah, so that essentially wipes out my arena scoring from this particular area. Going through the other factions, so the yellow faction, the air faction, they would be able to add your opponent's top student card, which is the one that is on the very top, and add it of any of the others of the same element as well to your column of students. And so if I were to activate this, I would add all of the fire students over to my side of the board, or the one closest to me, the white. The earth, the green one, can choose an element and then discard all of your opponent's student cards in that arena of that element type. The water one, the blue, allows you to immediately take a past trial action and ignore a level. So this would be really helpful in this situation because I have a lot of trial 4 cards and I have some 2 cards right here, some level 2 trials. And so if I had 3 blue cards here, I would be able to discard one of them and pass a trial to place this 4 on top of a 2 and score some more points. The darkness, the purple darkness faction, will be able to steal the opponent's top trial card in this arena. And I believe it follows the same rules where the number of trial has to supersede the one that you're placing it on top of. And then if you discard any student, any color of student can also have the Maleficio curse, which is to have your opponent discard half the cards in their hand rounded down. So you can do that with any of the factions as well. It's a secondary type of spell. And then once again, so we go back and forth drawing cards from the deck, reshuffling as necessary until we have 15 points showing and our opponent has 9 or less on their side. Going back to some of the additional rules, the game ends when one of these conditions is met. You have 20 or more trial points, so rather than having 15 and then your opponent having 9 or fewer, if you do reach 20, that automatically triggers the end, or your opponent has 9 or fewer trial points and the trial deck is empty. So, so that can conclude the game as well. So I'm going to quickly end it there. I didn't set up, I guess, the perfect scenario for these cards to show exactly what this game does. And I'll just go straight into my first impressions of this game. I don't believe much has changed in the re-implementation of this game from Babel, aside from the setting and the aesthetics of this game. But going right into like game comparisons, it kind of reminds me of two games in particular. The first being Lost Cities, a Reiner Knizia game where it is a two-player game, set up very similarly as this game is set up, where you are trying to make bids for different expeditions that you're going on, and trying to sequentially order cards in ascending order onto your different expeditions to gain as many points as possible for reaching the end of those expeditions, right? And having more cards than your opponent does. And so it's a very not take that kind of game, but it is interactive in the sense that you are trying to play for certain areas and certain columns, very much like this game does, right? I feel like in comparison, though, Lost Cities is more of an interactive, like a neutral type of interaction where you do, place cards for your opponent to potentially draw from, and you're essentially just competing for, the majority of certain expeditions and columns, right? In this game, with the spells themselves in Clash of Magic Schools, they can have a lot of negative interaction, right? You can destroy all of the arena cards or trial cards in one arena, right? You can take students from one side and move them to the other. It can feel very punitive, right? There's, on one side, you have to have 3 cards in a row in order to do something like the fire one, the Combustio spell, which, I mean, imagine if I had I think it goes up to 6 points, 5 or 6. If I had that on this side and completely removed it, sure, I would be able to draw it soon from the top of the deck, but that feels like a lot of progress that was made that is immediately cut down. And so I can see a scenario where using the secondary curse and discarding cards from your opponent's hand could be beneficial to prevent them from gathering the necessary cards to have a very negative impact on your game. And on the other hand, it does kind of serve as a catch-up mechanism for another player to keep themselves in the game, right? All that to say is, and actually I'll get back to that thought, but the second game that I want to compare this to is Bonanza, which is another Rosenberg game where the card ordering does matter. I particularly liked the fact that you can move 3 cards from one stack to the other to hopefully mix and match like I did here, right, with the green students. So you can mix and match them to in a prior turn, you might have not had enough, of the same type of card in a row to activate a spell, but now with that summoning action, you could do so. And so that card ordering factor in this game felt very reminiscent of Bonanza, and how your card order in your hand is static and you can't switch it around. And so it adds an additional layer to the decisions that you need to make and what to potentially prepare yourself for in the future when you're trying to set yourself up for the maximum amount of success. So I'll So, rating this game, I give it a 6.1 out of 10. This was an anticipated game for myself, and I guess I kind of knew ahead of time, just based off of what I've heard from Babel, that it might not be I mean, it's not Rosenberg's most acclaimed game, of course. It is an interesting game in the fact that you have the ability to be very interactive with your opponents, right? It feels very, if it's not take that, it is very adjacent to a take that kind of situation. It's not, like I mentioned before, the easiest thing to pull off. You do need to arrange your cards in such a way that it kind of helps you feel clever about how you take your actions in what order, with a little bit of luck involved, of course, to be able to pull off some major upsets against your opponent. So it's not like immediately negative all the time, but there is an aspect where you can really take the wind out of someone's sails, right? And so that can feel pretty bad if you play with certain players who aren't accustomed to that or don't prefer that in their gameplay. The game itself, too, I think that one of the biggest hiccups is that in comparison to Lost Cities again, I feel like this game, like one round, would feel like the entire 3 or so rounds that it takes to play Lost Cities. This game feels a lot longer than it perhaps should, and maybe that is partly due to the negative connotations of some of the spells to hinder your opponent from progressing too far. I can see it as a mitigation for the luck factor in what cards you draw from the student deck, as well as what you get from the trial deck as well. However, I feel like this does play about 45 to an hour, which feels really long for the weight and complexity of this game. And speaking of which, it's not the easiest game to intuit. It's not as easy and streamlined and elegant as Lost Cities is. It does take a while to understand what each faction does with their spells, and so I think paradoxically this would lend itself to some mastery. I think understanding the mechanisms of this game, albeit a little bit obtuse and complex, can lead to some interesting play, I think, if you do place at someone at a higher skill level, right? Lost Cities, I feel like you're playing the other player. There's an element of bluffing, essentially, that could, as you have secret information in your hand, that could, you could pretend to commit to one expedition while really having the cards for another, or knowing what your opponent has in front of them, you can, keep cards that they would need to progress, right? And so there's, I think, more of a player bluffing, type of element to that game, and I think it's here too. But I feel like the game feels a lot more complex than what it actually plays like, and so, despite the low score, and this is why I'm kind of perplexed, is that I did enjoy this game. I do enjoy this game. I think it's really it provides an interesting puzzle in terms of like how much do you commit from your hand to play on the board, right? If you exhaust all of your cards here, you have to spend a couple of turns to build up enough cards to allow for flexibility to move around and commit to certain columns in order to decrease the amount of trials here that you have in your pile or your opponent's pile, and to progress your game further. This game is mean, and that is usually not what I expect from a Rosenberg game. I feel like the interactions are mostly neutral in that game, in his games, where it's like blocking someone from a worker placement spot, right? Versus here, where there is pretty direct interaction between you and your player. I will say that in recent times, I've gravitated more towards two-player games because, one, it's easier to, or it's faster, right, than a multiplayer game usually, depending on the game. Two, it's easier for me to keep track of one opponent and what their board state is, rather than two or more opponents aside from myself. And so, I've really enjoyed the, person versus person aspect, one versus one. And it just adds, I don't know, it makes it faster and more interesting for me to at a competitive level, and so this game is set up to be competitive, and it uses a lot of competitive mechanisms when it comes to the spells. And I like the flexibility that you have to do a number of different, sub actions on your whole turn to really help you feel clever about what you're trying to do and accomplish on your turn. And so I feel like there's an element to like having enough cards in your hand to be flexible, kind of waiting for your opponent to commit and react to that as well, to hopefully mitigate the amount of luck as possible. It is a lucky game in terms of what trial cards and what student cards you get in what order. And so there's always that aspect, and I wish the game was a little bit quicker. Maybe it would be quicker if, like, for example, the Combustio action only took off one trial instead of the whole pile and placed it on top of the trial deck, right? And so you essentially discard a card to take 1 point off of your opponent. Something like that maybe would make this game a little bit quicker, and maybe there were some changes that made it quicker versus the original Babel. But I am interested in continuing to play this game. I think it would be really nice to have someone, and I think in general, this game rewards you from playing the same opponent over and over again, or playing the game over and over again. So if this was on Board Game Arena, for example, this would be fantastic to really understand the subliminal nuances of this game in terms of how to read your opponent and how to react in certain situations to optimize your chances of success against the luck of the draw. And maybe that speeds up play a little bit. I wish it was a little bit quick, like 15 minutes quicker than the lowest time count on the box, but it's a very intriguing game, and I think my fun factor for this game would increase as I play it more. So despite the low score, it has a lot of potential for me, and I find that very interesting. And maybe this is all inherent bias for my love of Rosenberg games. If this was from another designer, I might have given it more of a pass. And it's definitely not my favorite Rosenberg game for sure. I would rather have this player versus player experience playing a game like Oranienburger Canal or Fields of Arle or Glass Road at 2 players, right? Some of those games really hit well for me at the 2-player experience. And so I don't know, I think this is a very interesting design. I wonder, I think it came out around the time as Lost Cities did. I think it was afterwards. And so this kind of has that same feeling from 20 years ago, where maybe games were a little bit meaner back then. And so it was an interesting blast from the past to have this re-implemented and introduced to a perhaps newer audience who wasn't aware of these types of games back in the day. And so I'm grateful to have played it, and I will own it. I do own it and will continue to play it when I can. And I am interested in, completing more games and seeing how things turn out if I play against people who are more experienced or, have a winning strategy that I want to pursue in a future game. So it has piqued my interest, and hopefully that means it will score higher with further plays. And so I'm interested in doing that. So that is my quick playthrough of a few turns and first impressions of Clash of Magic Schools by Rosenberg. So let me know what you think if you've played it or if you're interested in it. Let me know if I got anything wrong as well. And thank you for listening or watching, and hope to catch you on the next video. Take care.